Welcome to members and to our witnesses to our 16th meeting of the Standing Committee on Industry, Science and Technology, this 13th of May 2010. For the first 45 minutes of our meeting of today, we will be here pursuant to Standing Order 108, subsection 2, for a study of Canada's foreign ownership rules and regulations in the telecommunications sector. And for that 45-minute period, we are happy to have the Honourable Tony Clement, the Minister of Industry, in front of us, along with two of his officials, Deputy Minister Discerny and Senior Associate Deputy Minister Booth. So welcome to all three of you, and we'll begin with an opening statement from the Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the opportunity. Greetings, bon matin, tout le monde. Before turning to the specific issue of foreign investment restrictions, I'd like to maybe put a little bit of context before this committee, if that's all right. In March, the
government set out its agenda in the speech of the throne. One of the themes it set out was that of building the jobs and industries of the future, including a number of forthcoming initiatives. I would like to touch on two of these.
Strategy to drive the adoption of new technologies across the economy and the country. And second, opening Canada's doors further to venture capital and to foreign investment in key sectors, including the satellite and telecommunications industries, giving Canadian firms access to the funds and expertise they need. Mr. Chairman, I highlight these as they share an important linkage. The telecoms industry is a key player in the modern digital economy. In fact, the telecoms infrastructure can be seen as the platform on which the digital economy operates. Now, as you may know, on May 10th, we launched the public consultation to help inform the development of Canada's digital economy strategy. In doing so, we'll be addressing some important questions. How can we improve the adoption and the use of digital technologies in the rest of the Canadian economy? What kind of digital infrastructure will we need for the 21st century? What is needed in terms of investment, research, and skills to grow the size of the ICT industry and the number of ICT firms headquartered in Canada? How can we develop digital media and content to promote a digital economy? And how can we ensure that the necessary skills development for active participation by all Canadians in a globally competitive economy, digital economy? Le secteur canadien des télécommunications est à...
Canadian telecommunication sectors, it has an important cross point in the private sector. Decisions are taken according to massive investments for all telecommunication services.
That the right regulatory framework is in place to incent investment, creating a competitive marketplace. Now, the government has encouraged competition in the wireless sector. In 2008, as we know, we held an auction for radio spectrum for new wireless services. In order to encourage competition, we set aside specific frequencies that could only be bid on by new market entrants. And we're very pleased that a number of new players responded to this mechanism by bidding successfully and acquiring licenses. Only one of these providers has actually launched service, as we know, Global Live Wireless, but others have announced plans to deploy later this year. Now, Chair, I know that many members have questions about the Global Live case, so let me explain a bit about what the government did. Last December, Cabinet varied a CRTC decision that found that Global Live was not Canadian-owned and controlled. Now, why did we do that? We did that because the government concluded that the company is a Canadian company that meets the Canadian ownership and control requirements as specified in the Telecommunications Act. The government's decision was based on the specific facts of the case, and it meant that the company could begin operating without delay. In light of this court proceeding that is now in place, there is obviously a court challenge. I cannot comment on a lot of the details further than what I have just said. So let me finally turn to the issue of telecommunications foreign direct investment and the government's commitment to, quote, open Canada's doors further to venture capital and to foreign investment in key sectors, including the satellite and telecommunications industries, end of quote. Now, why are we doing this, you might ask? Well, there's already considerable economic research on how foreign direct investment, or FDI as the economists call it, benefits an economy. Many studies show that FDI drives firms to be more productive and innovative. Empirical studies have found that FDI has a net positive effect on overall productivity growth. There's also empirical evidence that shows that foreign-owned firms are as productive as the most productive Canadian firms, thereby contributing to raise the productivity of Canadian industries. FDI contributes to productivity growth not only by making productivity-enhancing technology transfers to Canada, but also by providing positive spillovers to the adoption of advanced technologies by Canadian industries. So, Mr. Chair, that's a tangible positive contribution to the standard of living right here in Canada. Foreign investment helps firms to compete in an increasingly global economy, which is essential for Canada's prosperity as a trading nation. Foreign investment provides access to international management expertise and access to global supply chains and networks. Now, Canadian satellite providers face an immediate challenge. Canada allows foreign satellites to offer service in Canada in direct competition with Canadian suppliers. This has created an uneven playing field because Canadian providers must compete against these foreign providers both in Canada and abroad. The problem is that the foreign providers are not subject to investment restrictions either in Canada or at home. The satellite industry is global in nature, and removal of foreign ownership restrictions will allow Canadian firms to access foreign capital and advanced technologies and develop strategic global relationships that will enable them to achieve economies of scale and participate fully in foreign markets. I have followed the committee's proceedings on these matters with great interest, and there has been a comprehensive and broad range of testimony from academics, incumbent and new entrant telecommunications companies, content producers, cultural groups, and others, of course. This testimony has conveyed the full range and complexity of the issues at hand, including rapidly changing business models and technologies, integrated networks and product offerings, carriage, broadcasting, content, and of course, culture. And so with respect to broadcasting, I can tell you that we will not consider anything that might impair our ability to pursue our Canadian culture and content policy objectives, period, full stop.
Very pleased that the committee has decided to study this important issue because this allowed me to collect valuable information and insight. We have followed very closely the work of the committee, and we look forward to receiving your report. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Minister. And now we have 35 minutes for questions and comments from members of the committee. And we'll start with Mr. Garneau. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
This morning, I think it's widely acknowledged that the spectrum auction of 2008 was mismanaged primarily because of what happened to Global Live, I beg your pardon, which paid initially some $400 million to obtain a portion of the spectrum, and then later on the question of foreign ownership was examined, and as you know, CRTC decided that it did not satisfy the requirements with respect to Canadian ownership. You reversed that decision. You spoke briefly about it in your opening statements. What you're saying effectively is that the CRTC was wrong in its interpretation. Am I correct in saying that? Am I also correct in saying that because you have reversed the decision of the CRTC, that there is obviously some confusion about the interpretation of what constitutes foreign ownership? Does this mean that you are going to make changes to legislation or regulations to more clearly define what you consider to be Canadian ownership requirements?
Yeah, let me just respond to the characterization, and I guess respectfully disagree with some of the elements of that, Mr. Garneau. I would say that in this particular case of Global Live, reasonable minds could differ, that the CRTC came to a conclusion that for the purposes of the Telecommunications Act, that Global Live was not Canadian controlled. We came to a different interpretation. And when we looked at the facts of the case, when you looked at the structure of the board of directors, when you looked at the structure of the voting shares in the company, and most importantly, when you looked at the structure of the day-to-day management of the company, in each of those cases you could conclude responsibly and reasonably that it was not foreign controlled. So there was a respectful disagreement. Sometimes that happens in public policy, and it was not meant as any disrespect to the CRTC. We just came to, based on the facts of the case, we came to a different conclusion, which we think is defensible and correct. Having said that, in answer to the second part of your question, I would say that we have been studying very closely the CRTC's submission to this committee, where they did call for changes to legislation as well as content requirements. So we're studying that. That all goes into the hopper. I would tell you that the government has not made any decisions on how exactly to move forward on liberalization of telecom ownership. and investment. And so anything that this committee also hears from and decides itself will all go into the hopper.
Thank you. Obviously, the CRTC had a different interpretation. I would encourage you to provide clarification in the regulations so that hopefully in the future the CRTC's decision is not going to be challenged, because as you know, the other contestants in the spectrum auction also feel quite strongly that this was not a level playing field in terms of the outcomes here, because they had a different interpretation of what constituted Canadian ownership. I'd like to switch to another question, the question of FDI, foreign ownership. You have said that foreign ownership is a good thing. You have said that the Broadcasting Act is not going to be changed. What specifically are you planning with respect to foreign ownership regulations in the telecommunications sector?
Sure. Well, you know, liberalization to allow more foreign investment, as I said, empirically, in Canadian studies indicates, as I said, all of the positive attributes that I described in my remarks. You're asking for a specific plan of action. The fact of the matter is, the first thing that we're going to do is consult. We're going to consult with the public. We're going to consult with the players in the industry. We're going to consult with this committee. As I say, we are reading very closely the testimony before this committee on these issues, and we'll continue to do so. So that will help animate the various suite of options that are available to the government in terms of liberalization. So at this point, I'm not in a position to tell you exactly what is planned, because quite frankly, I think the first step that we have to do is consult and again, arrive at a series of options and then decide on the best option for Canada.
I have to take advantage of your presence here to ask you about another issue. You announced in 2008 in the budget, 2009, I beg your pardon, $225 million towards increasing broadband access across the country. You came out 14 or 15 months later, last week, with a number of projects. Is it your feeling that the $225 million is going to provide access to broadband to the whole country, or are you of the opinion that that will sort of go a little bit further, but that there's still more funding required to provide broadband access to all Canadians?
Well,
you must have done studies on it to estimate how much it would cost to provide it for the whole country.
Sure, fair enough. And the announcement that I made on Sunday was the first tranche of a series of rolling announcements over the next several weeks on further expansion of broadband based on that fund that you mentioned. And the fact of the matter is, Mr. Garneau, that really you cannot look at the fund from the government to expand rural and remote broadband in isolation. It's part of a whole series of changes that are going on in broadband access in our country. The private sector is investing billions of dollars into broadband expansion, as well as increasing the amount of throughput that is possible through the pipes. And so when you combine that with what the government is doing, we, of course, foresee the day when all of Canada will be covered. And one of the things that I did with the federal money was put it at the areas that are most needy first, not necessarily the areas that are closest to urban areas, but the areas that are actually more remote than that. And
but will that 225 do it?
No, $225 million was never going to do it, because it's not just a federal government issue. The provincial governments are investing. The private sector is investing. So your question is predicated on the. I hope it isn't. I hope it isn't predicated on the belief that the federal government can solve all this problem by its own. It's with the provinces, with the private sector, and the federal government that we will get to where we have to get to.
Thank you very much, Minister Clement, Mr. Garneau. Maintenant, Monsieur Godin.
And now, Mr. Godin. Thank you, Chair. Mr. Minister, good morning and welcome to the committee. If I placed myself in the CRTC shoes at the time, and I knew that Global Live had already paid $442 million to the government, and I had a decision to take on the situation, don't you believe that the more than relative importance of the amount involved And my decision then, as president of the CRTC, wouldn't be taken lightly. We must also say that when the decision was taken, and if we look at Article 116 of the decision that I cited, allow me to read it. Notwithstanding these additional funds, there are great concerns regarding the de facto control Corascom has over Globalive. In the present case, the file indicates that Corascom has a Canadian name and holds 2/3 of Globalive's capital and constitutes the main source of technical expertise and allows Globalive to make use of an established trademark in the wireless network. That's Article 116 of the CRTC decision. Do you believe that Corascom really does hold 2/3 of Globalive's capital? Allow me to speak in English because there are more specific issues involved for me.
A couple of things. First of all, no, we looked at this very, very closely with a lot of good legal advice, and there's no question, if you look at the structure of the board of directors, if you look at the voting shares of the company, who holds the voting shares, and if you look at the day-to-day management decisions, we came to, I believe, a reasonable, fair, and accurate conclusion that it meets the test in the Telecommunications Act to be Canadian-controlled, or in one case, not foreign-controlled, in the case of the board, not foreign-controlled. So, yes, we feel very comfortable on the facts of this particular case that it met the test of the Telecommunications Act.
Because when I talk about 2/3 of holdings, of course, this is directly or indirectly, but you're explaining to me how you arrived at the de facto control, because there's real control, more than 50% of direct interest. So I'd like to know how you interpret the holdings yourself.
Je peux dire,
I can say the same thing that I've already said. If we examine the facts of the case, and specifically in this case, it was quite clear for us that this company was controlled by Canadian interests for the day-to-day decisions, and these are the decisions which are therefore taken by Canadians, not by foreigners or foreign interests. So in our minds, there was no issue of foreign control of decisions for this company. And it is quite clear that for the test under the Telecommunications Act, it passed the test. I cannot say anything more regarding this. So within the throne speech, it was quite clear that the government was showing its will to amend the Telecommunications Act. And the fact that it revealed its intention to modify the Telecommunications Act regarding ownership, I would say it doesn't really truly reflect the fact that the decision made at the time contravened the spirit of the law. If you review and analyze all of the aspects under the Telecommunications Act. So I'm persuaded, and many others likewise, after a review, that for the government it became imperative to correct the situation. Of course, it wasn't going to make the Telecommunications Amendments Act, and so therefore, do you intend to do so very soon?
I don't think the two are connected at all. The first decision on Orascom Globalive was made on the facts of that particular case. The decision to consider liberalization and more access to foreign capital in the telecoms industry was made as a public policy decision that will be advantageous to Canadians. More choice, more quality service. These are things that people expect in telecom, and we think that liberalization will be helpful in that regard. So the two are not connected.
Thank you. Monsieur Bouchard, avez-vous une question?
Bouchard, do you have a question? Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for having been here, as well as the Deputy Minister. You said, Mr. Minister, that foreign investments have an effect on productivity and that foreign investments increase competition. In other words, you're quite positive regarding foreign investment. I could say even very positive. I have an experience in my region. Rio Tinto bought Elcan. And I can tell you one thing. First thing that Rio Tinto did in my region, and even outside my region, they sold the processing businesses, and decisions are being taken in London. This company, therefore, has headquarters in London, decisions are taken in London, and therefore is not very sensitive to the effects on the population and the desires and claims of the population in my region and just outside it. So I'd like to draw an analogy or a parallel here. Telecommunications by foreign investment. Do you share the idea that we could draw the same parallel as I've just described for you? Very briefly, foreign businesses and foreign investments in telecom, we then, as Quebecers and Canadians, are losing a great part of our control over the content. And in order to protect our culture, especially our Canadian and our Quebec culture, if we do so, it's very difficult to arrive at those conclusions right now, since there's no specific context. But I could say that all of the studies that I've read, and it became quite clear that, quite frankly, it is possible to have a higher productivity, greater competition, more jobs, and a greater choice for Canadian markets with investments from abroad. There is no decision here in the Government of Canada as to how these investments are to be obtained. Of course, this is a challenge for this committee and for the government. We haven't yet made a decision in this regard. Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. Thank you, Mr. Minister. Thank you, Mr. Bouchard.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being here this morning. As we all celebrate the victory of the Montreal Canadiens last evening, Canada's team, I'm sure everyone around the table can agree on that today. Minister, you, in your presentation, just to begin, if you could help us set the context, you spoke about the importance of improving productivity in Canada. Could you speak to why that is an important priority for our country?
Absolutely. As you know, we are emerging as a nation at the front of the line as we recover from the world economic recession. We have a real opportunity, I believe, in this country to help make an economy that will be more competitive and more innovative for the next generation of Canadians. And that means that we have to have access to the best minds, access to capital, make sure that Canadians who have good ideas have the opportunity to bring those to market, to commercialize those good ideas in Canada, hopefully. You know, we as an economy need the next generation of, whether it's RIM or open text in the ICT sector, or when you look at some of our next generation auto parts makers, our aerospace giants. So we have a lot that is going good for us as an economy, but we need to continue to invest in the culture of innovation if we're going to succeed in that regard. So when I look at government policy, which is not the entire story, but can be of assistance to the economy and to the players in our economy into getting to innovation, getting to competitiveness, then that's the prism through which I look at public policy at Industry Canada. And that's why, for instance, the Budget 2010's decision to remove the manufacturing tariffs for new equipment, for instance, first in the G20 to do that, why fixing the problem with Section 116 of the Income Tax Act to allow for more venture capital for our Canadian-based sector industries. That's why all of those things are important. And I don't believe there's a silver bullet, Mr. Braid. I don't believe there's one thing that's going to tell the whole story on competitiveness. But if we do a series of things, they will make cumulatively a difference.
Thank you. Minister, you've stated today and previously as well that the government is considering liberalizing foreign investment restrictions and specifically and exclusively with the telecommunications sector and not the broadcasting sector. As you know, we've been studying this issue at committee. We've had some witnesses who've suggested to us that we can make a clear distinction between those two sectors and both the telecommunications and the broadcasting acts and the authorities and the protections under each, and that we can separate them into two different buckets. We've had others who've suggested that we can't make a distinction and that there are complications to consider as a result. Could you respond to those who suggest that a distinction between the two sectors and the two acts, telecommunications and broadcasting, cannot be made?
Sure. And look, I'm not saying it's easy, but it certainly isn't impossible to draw the distinction between telecommunications as a field of endeavor and activity and broadcasting and the content that goes into broadcasting. And there is no question there's been convergence in the industry between those who are providing telecommunications and the broadcasting. There's no question that that's a matter of public record. But in our view, it is possible to deal with those separately. And as I said in my opening remarks, we're very clear. We're not here to change the Broadcasting Act. We're not here to alter the provisions that are in place right now that protect Canadian content and culture in that act or generally as a matter of government policy. So is that going to require some stick handling? There's no question. It's not we are in shades of gray. There's no question. But I think that we can, with good public policy that is clear with its intent and its description, get to where we have to get to allow the ability for investment to occur in the sector that we want it to occur in.
Thank you. Moving now specifically to the satellite sector, could you please elaborate, Minister, on what the benefits to consumers will be to opening up foreign ownership restrictions on Canadian satellite operators, specifically benefits to better, with respect to better price, better service, better quality?
Yeah, I think it's really, we're at the point now where, we have to level the playing field for the Canadian satellite companies, and obviously thinking of Telesat in particular, but others as well. The fact of the matter is there is an unlevel playing field because they don't have access to foreign capital for their business plans, and all their competitors do. And right now, Canada is a world leader in satellite technology and satellite deployment. We have to continue to be that. That's a strategic area for this country, I would put it to you. And so this will allow those companies to, as part of their mix of investment, seek the foreign markets for some of that mix, and allow them to compete on a level playing field. That allows them to rely on that kind of investment rather than on price points to be uncompetitive and higher priced in the marketplace. And I think that'll be a good thing ultimately for Canadian consumers.
Thank you, thank you, Minister. Thank you, Mr. Braid. Mr. Massey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Minister, for being here today. You mentioned in your remarks about improving the headquarters, increasing the headquarters in Canada of companies. Why is that important?
Well, look, we're in a global marketplace, so not every company is going to be headquartered in Canada. Having said that, we do know that if we have a competitive company that can compete on the world stage, win world markets, and yet is headquartered in Canada, that can be one way of ensuring that Canadians are able to participate in higher up the value chain, higher management and innovation. It's not the only way. I think I know where you're going on this, and there's a lot of good examples of foreign companies who have invested in Canada and invested in Canadians to an extent that we are participating in those sectors as well. But I think any economy, to be fair to you, Mr. Massey, any economy should have a mix of that. It shouldn't be one or the other.
It just seems completely counter to everything your government has done. And, you look at the case of Vale right now, where clearly foreign ownership has led to a considerable strike of a long duration. You've refused to make public comments on it. What do you think about that situation that's happening there right now?
Well, it's not. I don't think it's accurate to say I haven't commented on it. I've certainly said that we wish that the parties get back to the bargaining table, and we wish them well when they are back at the bargaining table. Having numerous conversations with the mayor of Sudbury on this matter. We're at one in encouraging the parties to settle their differences through mediation or through bargaining. Ultimately, of course, this is a provincial, in terms of labor relations, this is more of a provincial matter, as you know. But
I mean, you approved, your government did, the takeover there, and we could have had a Canadian iconic company between Falconbridge and Inco. The government chose another scenario by allowing this to happen. Have you actually talked to the leadership of Vale in this matter?
Actually, I wasn't the industry minister at the time, so
I know you
leave
weren't.
it to my
That's what's in your
deputy minister
government.
to answer that question.
I don't, excuse me, I don't think it's fair to characterize these two independent transactions as being the work of the government.
Well, be quite frank, Mr. Attorney, that's your opinion. The end result was that it had to be triggered through this process. So, by approval, that's the end of the day. I'm just going to have you talk to the leadership of Vale about this issue.
Look, I know it's the NDP position that we should inject ourselves into the middle of the strike. I don't think it's our place to do that. I think it's the province. Mr. McGuinty has made it clear. They have what their position is. They have been involved in mediation. I think the last thing that this situation needs is another order of government injecting itself in when it has no constitutional authority to do so. I don't think that's going to be helpful, and quite frankly, the mayor of Sudbury agrees with me in that regard.
Well, I'll move on, but you did that to auto workers. You got up in the House of Commons and you talked about having them to make concessions. You said that in the House of Commons.
Well,
so you've done that on the other. You've done that on the other side.
That was
You've done that on the other side.
Part of an auto rescue, where Government of Canada funds were involved, sir.
Well, okay. I thank you for your announcements with regards to the broadband and rollout. But I would like to know: does that include any of the accounts that were basically they were brought back, the deferral accounts that were paid back out to the government? This is with regards to the overcharge. So is that money still available, the deferral accounts, and when will that be available to roll out? Because consumers were supposed to get some of that money back, and then it's also to include some disabled and as well remote community development.
The deferral accounts are under the guidance of the CRTC. They are not related to the announcement the Minister made on Sunday.
So the CRTC, is there any reason why the CRTC has not moved on this decision? The Supreme Court has ruled on it. when will the CRTC then release these funds?
We're not aware.
We'll get back to you.
We're not aware of the particulars of that. We'll have to get
It's
back to you.
not part of.
Okay, well, it's hundreds of millions of dollars that's sitting out there that either is owed to consumers through the decision or also could increase broadband delivery. So I just hope that there would be a plan on that and perhaps looking to challenge the CRTC on that. With regards to the foreign takeovers that could take place with regards to the expansion of the telco industry right now, you have a series of new entrants, the 3 new entrants that have come in. The CRTC presented that they expect if we do more liberalization or open it up, there would actually be a consolidation of the industry. We've heard that also from testimony here. What is your government doing to actually guarantee, though, that consumers are going to get better pricing and better servicing? If that's the intent, is there going to be a consumer bill of rights? What is going to protect the consumer out there to ensure that we just don't have either consolidation or we have several continued players that have similar pricing, similar services, and there's still no real competition? How will that be managed?
Sure. I think what I can do right now is note your question and your concerns. Obviously, no decisions have been made, and we are watching and reading very closely the testimony before this table. And as I said earlier, it all goes into the hopper and will be part of our decision making.
If Canadians do not get better pricing and better service at the end of whatever takes place, or with the new entrants, or if things stay the status quo, and after 2 years, will you consider the opening of the market and adding the new entrants a failure? Is the goal going to be at the end of the day to have lower consumer pricing for Canadians and better service, or is it just to have others in there? And if you do, it does fail to provide that extra competition and provide more service to Canadians, what will your government do about that?
Well, there's a lot of speculation in that question, Mr. Massey. I think I counted 3 ifs. I think there may have been more. So, look, all I can do is say that empirical research has indicated that if you do things the right way, and that there's an if there too, you can increase competition, you can lower prices, you can increase service. I talk to a lot of Canadians, as you do, and everyone has a story about their mobile provider or their ex-provider. So, I think even in their quiet moments, the incumbents realize that competition can be good to sharpen pencils and to give consumers more choice and quality.
Thank you very much, Mr. Massey. Thank you, Minister. We'll suspend for 5 minutes to allow additional witnesses to come to the table. And when we come out of suspension, we'll begin our review of the main estimates. This meeting is suspended for 5 minutes. We're coming out of suspension, and welcome to our additional witnesses. We have Madame Yellick in front of us today as well, who is joining us as the Minister responsible for Western economic diversification, and as well she has officials from her department, Mr. Watson, Mr. Saunderson, and Madame Bernard. And so we welcome all of you to our committee. We're here to review the main estimates for ACOA, for WED, and for the Economic Development Agency for the regions of Quebec, as well as for Industry Canada. And we have a number of votes to take at the end of our meeting today. And so what we'll do, without any further delay, is we'll hear opening statements from each of the two ministers, beginning with Madame Yellick.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Madame, Messieurs, I welcome the opportunity to appear before this committee and to highlight how our government, through my Department of Western Economic Diversification Canada, is contributing to a stronger economic future for the West and for all of Canada. Since 1987, WD has worked to promote the development and diversification of the economy of Western Canada and to advance the interests of the West in national economic policy, program, and project development and implementation. There have been a lot of changes over the 23 years that have passed since that mandate was created. This mandate is just as relevant today. The West remains a distinct region within Canada, one with its own unique challenges and opportunities that need to be reflected in federal initiatives aimed at strengthening our country's performance in the knowledge-based economy. The challenges facing Western Canada currently have evolved from those we faced 23 years ago. While we have accomplished much, it is even more important today than it was in 1987 that Western Canada expand its economy into new areas, whether that is in adding new elements to our world-leading natural resource capabilities, or becoming dominant players in sectors of the economy that no one could have dreamed of 25 years ago. The list of Western Canada's competitors on a global basis has changed significantly in virtually all sectors. Competitors who were sometimes small in the scale and who lacked market presence have in many cases made significant gains in markets that were easily won by Western Canadian businesses. These competitors have set extraordinarily high standards in innovation and productivity that Western Canadian businesses need not only match but beat if they are to continue to enjoy the successes of the past. By working to create a more diversified Western Canadian economy that has strong, competitive, and innovative businesses, WD is building a solid and more diverse foundation that will support the West's economic success over the long term. And while we're planning for the long term, this past year, we also recognized and addressed the immediate challenges posed by global financial circumstances. Through the delivery of Canada's Economic Action Plan, our government in Western economic diversification is responding to short-term economic challenges by creating jobs and growth in Western Canada today that allow people to keep their businesses, find work, and remain in their communities during difficult economic times. WD is delivering two key components of the Economic Action Plan in the Western provinces: RINC, the Recreational Infrastructure Canada program, and CAF, the Community Adjustment Fund. The severity of the global economic downturn required a swift and decisive response. And like the government as a whole, WD rose to the challenge. By January 29, 2010, WD had committed 100% of its RINC funding, the almost $153 million provided to the West. In the short time from program announcement to full commitment of funding, the Department defined the terms and conditions, made a call for proposals, analyzed, selected projects, and entered into contribution agreements. More than 700 projects, recreation centers, arenas, swimming pools, sports fields, parks, rinks, and community centers have been approved. Many of them are already being implemented and being completed, and these projects are not only building a substantial legacy of recreational infrastructure in Western Canadian communities, they have created or maintained more than the equivalent of 8,000 person-months of employment across the 4 Western provinces to date, and there will be many more in the months ahead. The results have been similar for the CAF program, which is providing $306 million over 2 years to support Western communities that have experienced significant job losses and lack alternative employment opportunities. All of the funding has now been committed to projects that have already created or maintained more than 17,000 person-months of employment in Western Canada's most vulnerable communities to date. The 290 approved projects are as diverse as the very communities themselves. From a wood pellet plant in Merritt to a technology commercialization center in Lethbridge to a trades training center in Saskatoon and an industrial park business incubator in Morden, Manitoba. Canada's Economic Action Plan is working, and it will benefit Western Canada for years to come. But as important as it is to respond to the needs of today, we must also continue to build the jobs and industries for the future. That is why we were pleased to see Budget 2010 acknowledge the major role that Canada's regional development agencies, including Western Diversification, playing in building that future by supporting jobs, growth, and innovation within a context that is unique in each of Canada's diverse regions. The impact of Budget 2010 was considerable for my department. Ever since its creation, a significant component of WD's funding had to be renewed every few years, making it difficult to plan for the medium and long term and causing hardship for our external stakeholders and partners. Budget 2010 removed this uncertainty by making this component of WD funding permanent, allowing us to continue to focus our support on initiatives that will drive the West's long-term success by expanding the West's knowledge-based economy, by investing in innovation and technology commercialization, the foundation of economic diversification. Creating trade and investment opportunities that help Western Canadian businesses expand into the international markets and attract foreign investment, driving the region's future prosperity, and enhancing the productivity and competitiveness of Western small and medium-sized businesses, key components of long-term economic growth and an increased standard of living for all Canadians. Budget 2010 also maintains ongoing funding for Community Futures. Organizations across the country, there are 90 CFs in Western Canada, members of WD's Business Service Network, have a history of working with Western Diversification and other partners to enhance business and community economic development outside the West's major urban centres. WD is grateful for the strong support of our government and how it is shown for our role in enhancing the West's contribution to our nation's success, and we are determined to take that contribution to the next level. WD's report on plans and priorities for 2010-2011 brings the department's efforts together under a single strategic outcome. The Western Canadian economy is developed and diversified. Underlying that strategic outcome are program activities that encourage business development, innovation, and community economic development, supported by the department's leadership and coordination role in furthering Western interests and responding to Western challenges. WD recognizes that households across the country have adjusted their budgets in response to the new economic realities, and so must we. We are redoubling our efforts to improve the department's efficiency, ensuring that the investment of taxpayers' dollars results in maximum benefits for the people and the Western Canadian economy. WD is proud of the way it's creating and maintaining jobs today while building a stronger Western economy that will continue to create new jobs in the future. We are looking forward to completing the work begun last year on Canada's Economic Action Plan and to working closely with Western provinces, industry associations and businesses, other stakeholders to leverage the opportunities that will see Western Canada reach new levels of success in the global economy. By working together with our partners to create more innovative and more successful business communities, we are building a stronger West for a stronger Canada. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Merci, Madame Yelleck. Mr.
Thank you, Ms. Yelleck. Minister Clement.
Make an opening statement with regard to the estimates.
Very quickly, Chair, just let me address the committee on the current status of the 2010-11 main estimates. Toutefois, je souhaiterais commencer.
However, I'd like to start by pointing out for the committee the recent initiatives of Industry Canada. When I addressed the committee in March, I presented the three main objectives on which the budget of 2010 was based. First of all, implement the second year of the Economic Action Plan, and secondly, draw up a plan to come back to financial balance, and thirdly, target investments in order to position Canada in view of tomorrow's economy.
The government is moving forward with the implementation of some key initiatives to improve Canada's competitiveness. Now, as a government, one of the strongest tools we have to stimulate economic growth is a competitive business environment, obviously. Our government has implemented significant tax reductions and tax changes to provide businesses with an environment that really encourages new investment. As a result of our actions, combined with provincial business tax changes as well, Canada's overall tax rate on new business investment is now the lowest in the G7.
We're also reducing costs to business by eliminating more than 1,500 tariffs on manufacturing inputs, machinery, and equipment in order to position Canada as the leading country in the G20s by creating a duty-free zone for manufacturing. Canadian manufacturers will be able to therefore import goods in order to produce more in Canada without having to pay customs duties and costs involved with the need to respect a number of customs regulations, including the rules of origin.
Sector investment, we have also introduced legislation to narrow the definition of Canadian taxable Canadian property, which will eliminate the need for tax reporting under Section 116 of the Income Tax Act for many investments. As I've said before, this will enhance the ability of Canadian businesses to attract foreign venture capital and help our emerging firms access funding and expertise in order to grow their businesses. And we're continuing to act on a number of other fronts to support Canadian businesses, such as by accelerating trade negotiations, cutting red tape, modernizing our competition and investment laws, further reducing internal trade barriers, working to create a national securities regulator, and streamlining our immigration system. Mais si un bon climat d'affaires.
Although a good business climate is important, it is also important that our policies also manage to promote and provide a stimulus to competition. In this regard, the digital economy is particularly promising. The information and communications technologies, the ICTs, are today as essential to success as in past times were primary commodities and means of transportation. As I mentioned earlier this morning, Canada can and should be a leader in the digital economy.
Digital economy strategy, we're going to be focusing on enabling our ICT, information and communication technology sector, to create new products and services, accelerate the adoption of digital technologies, and contribute to increased cyber security. Pursuing this strategy means fostering a culture of innovation in Canada supported by all sectors of the economy. And this will happen with the concerted efforts of governments, of academia, and business all working together. Success won't come solely through a particular government program or even a combination of government programs. It must come from a concerted effort with governments setting the right conditions so that individual businesses can be global leaders in their fields. De plus, notre gouvernement met.
Furthermore, our government is doing everything so that the population in distant regions and rural regions have access to digital infrastructures which they need for the with the program Broadband in Canada, a Connected Rural Environment. The 2009 budget devoted $225 million over 3 years to this initiative, which was officially launched by the Prime Minister last year in July. These then are the basic elements which will serve to help stimulate the private sector in order to encourage innovation and economic growth.
Progress in advancing this broadband program. To date, Industry Canada has received 570 applications requesting close to $1 billion. So there's obviously a lot of excitement in getting access to this program. Also this week, as we know, my colleagues and I announced that projects to bring broadband connectivity to 168,000 households in 58 communities have been approved for funding, and as I mentioned earlier, more will be coming in the weeks ahead. Broadband brings important economic and social benefits. It opens the door to information, services, and opportunities that would otherwise be out of reach. For unserved and underserved Canadians, particularly those in rural and remote areas, the program represents an important enhancement of service. And given the huge importance of access to high-speed networks, we will continue to play an ongoing role in ensuring that Canadians in rural areas are not left behind. Now, Canadian talent in science and engineering is one of our most important resources as well. Our university researchers and students are second to none in the world, and our public sector research capacity is amongst the strongest in the world as well. Recently, I announced a $350 million investment in the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council's Discovery Grants program. These grants support the ongoing work of more than 10,000 researchers based at universities all across the country. In addition, $122 million was announced for scholarships that are being awarded this year through NSERC's post-grad scholarships and postdoc fellowships programs and through NSERC's share of the Canada Graduate Scholarships program as well. Mais le financement des scientifiques et des
But the funding of scientists and engineers is only one half of the equation. They also need the most modern of installations in technology in order to be able to work. And in the 2009 budget, we committed $2 billion over 2 years for repairing and renewing the training infrastructure and R&D in our Canadian universities and colleges. I'm very pleased to announce that all of the funds under this program have now been allocated. We have 536 projects who have benefited from this, and funding agreements have been signed throughout the country and with all provinces. In April 2010, 44 projects had already been concluded.
Also strongly reinforce the importance of small businesses and entrepreneurship in the Canadian economy. For example, Budget 2010 provided $10 million in new funding for the Canadian Youth Business Foundation. This builds on our past record of supporting success, and since 1996, the CYBF has invested more than 3,500 young entrepreneurs who have created over 16,900 new jobs. This new funding will launch more than 500 businesses over the next 12 months, generating an estimated 2,500 new jobs. So in conclusion, Mr. Chair, taken together, I believe that these initiatives are part of a strong economic package that is successfully supporting Canada's economic recovery. It's a forward-looking package that is creating jobs, stimulating economic growth, boosting productivity, and increasing our global competitiveness. Je vous remercie de m'avoir consacré.
Thank you for having devoted time to me this morning, and it is with pleasure that I will answer your questions.
We'll have about an hour and 10 minutes of questions and comments from members of the committee. At 10:15, we'll then take the votes on these estimates. There's over $6 billion in votes to be approved by this committee for the estimates.
Mr. Chair,
yes, go ahead, Mr. Walsh.
On the schedule, just a point of order, it shows the ministers only here till 8. The ministers, sorry, at 8. Till 10, are they here till 10:30?
The officials are here till 10:30 to answer any questions we may have.
And the minister's here until 9:30.
That's right.
Okay.
So we'll have
Thank you.
about an hour and 10 minutes of questions and comments from members on the estimates to both the ministers
Okay.
and their officials.
Okay.
10:15, we need to take the votes.
Merci beaucoup.
And since there's quite a few votes, there's close to 30 votes to take. I'll set aside 15 minutes for that. And also just want to let members of the committee know that the ministers are leaving at 9:30, and the deputy minister has another committee to appear in front of at 10 o'clock. So he's graciously going to stay here till 10 after 10, and then he has to get to the Public Accounts Committee to testify. So we'll begin with Mr. Rhoda and Mr. Dhaliwal.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Because of time constrictions, we'll be sharing our time this morning, and I want to thank the Minister and the Minister of State for being here this morning. I was going through the estimates, and I read through the Atlantic Canada Opportunity Agencies, Western Economic Diversification Canada, Economic Development Agency of Canada for the regions of Quebec, and Federal Economics Development Agency for Southern Ontario. We see the planned spending, and we see it on a constant decrease. Normally we would call that cuts, but we'll call it a decrease for the benefit of discussion. Now, each agency has a clear breakdown of its activities, with each agency showing community development, infrastructure, special intervention measures, enterprise competitiveness, positioning of sectors and regions, policies, programs, and initiatives, internal services, all listed out. Everything's there, very clear. Each one of them is even graphed, so we have an idea, and we can see the trend going down. So it gives us an idea of what's coming up. Again, we may not like it, but when we look at it, the priorities are set for programs and for management. Everything's clearly laid out. The future of these agencies is well depicted. You know, we see what's happening, and we see where they're going. We know where they've been. We know where they're going. Now, it seems to be somewhat transparent. The question I have, and I think the minister probably expects this question, is can the minister tell me where I can find the same information for FedNor, which represents the people of Northern Ontario? Very simple.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. Certainly, we have terms and conditions for FedNor as well, which are always subject to a 5-year review. Those terms and conditions are made public, and we can certainly provide a copy for you if you have not been able to find them in the public record.
Well, I got that answer last time, and what I got was a glossy brochure that was very pretty but had absolutely no information in it. It had beautiful pictures of Northern Ontario, and of course you know that I think Northern Ontario is very beautiful. I come from there. But I don't need that information. What I need is the same information that I'm getting here in the main estimates on the individual agencies, so that the people of Northern Ontario will know what is being offered, where we've been, and where we're going. It seems we always get something 18 months after the fact.
I can assure you that the terms and conditions are available. We'll make sure you get that information. They are reviewed every 5 years. And as the honourable member knows, we also have in FedNor an unprecedented 5-year budget floor for FedNor, which had never occurred before. So we had a
if we can cut the PR for the Conservative Party and just kind of answer the questions. Okay, I'll wait for the information. I'll leave it at that, and I'll pass the question on to my colleague, Mr. Dhaliwal. Thank you.
And I would like to thank the ministers and the associates out here. My question is to the Minister WD, Madam Jelach. Since budget 2007, the core operating budget for WD has been systematically reduced every year. This trend will continue till year 2012 and 13, when the WD budget will have been cut by 48% when compared to the final year of the Liberal government in office. Can you please explain why this department is slowly being eliminated under your leadership?
Well, thank you for the question. WD's core funding has not changed. In fact, it was renewed in Budget 2010. And I just want to reiterate what I said in my speech, that the impact of this budget was very important for my department, because it was a significant component of WD's funding. It used to have to be renewed every year, and it's difficult to plan for medium and long term, causing hardship for our external stakeholders. The Budget 2010 removed this uncertainty by making this component of WD funding permanent. So now it is permanent, allowing us to continue to focus our support on initiatives that will drive the West's long-term success. So it was never permanent before. We deliver programming on behalf of other government departments such as Infrastructure Canada, Economic Action Plan funding, Alberta and Saskatchewan Centennial funding. So the main estimates are affected by the timing of additional initiatives and will change when supplementary estimates are tabled later in this year. But we are now, as I said, and I think that's a very important part, something that you should know, that it used to be dubious because they didn't know from year to year whether they were going to get funding. Now, with certainty, they will because of Budget 2010. It created permanent funding for WD and the other agencies.
I mean, contrary to what you say that it's permanent, the way I see it, because these are the main estimates, this sets up the plan for the future. And I just want to know from you in yes or no answer, would you confirm simply yes or no that the core operating budget for WD in year 2012 will be reduced by almost half what it was under the Liberal government in 2006?
Well, the drop-off you see in this year's mains are the result of the decision of the last Liberal budget in 2005.
True. I mean, the way I see it is, if I look at this article from 2002 by Mr. Harper, the Prime Minister, he clearly spoke about the plans for dismantling all regional economic development agencies like WD, ACOA, and others. And I can submit this article, Mr. Chair. It clearly states his intentions. When I look at the way the core spending budget for WD and other agencies is cut systematically every year, it seems like this is Prime Minister vendetta is been brought into action through your department and others. Would you like to comment on that?
Yes, this is 2010, and the Prime Minister spoke very clearly with his actions by making the funding for WD permanent. It allows us to focus on our initiatives, as I reread in my speech to you. This is permanent funding, something that was never done by the Liberal government. It was sunsetted. You had programs where the Liberal government had.
But on one side, you are saying you are making it permanent, but on the other hand, the numbers clearly show here. Numbers, Minister, clearly shows that every year it is reduced, and you are trying to dismantle the WD department.
I'll just, my Deputy Minister will maybe make it clearer to you, but we have not removed any funding.
Sure. Core operating.
Go ahead.
Funding.
Mr. Daly, I'll let Mr. Watson, Deputy Minister Watson, respond.
Sure. And thank you for the question. One of the things that, of course, has happened that the department didn't have before is a significant component of its funding was up for renewal every period of years. Budget 2010 puts an end to that cycle by proposing that funding be added permanently to the reference levels of the department. So what we wouldn't see in the future is the same drop-off related to that key component of our funding. One of the other big changes, and it's probably the most significant one in terms of where the dollars go, relates to the treatment of infrastructure funding. And there was a point in time where the way infrastructure funding was voted by Parliament was into the vote of Western diversification. There was a decision made at some point in the past to actually attach that more directly to Infrastructure Canada, which actually administers the program. And so the same volumes of dollars in many cases were simply reported under a different heading and not under Western diversifications anymore. And it's where, if you look at the core funding for the core activities we do, which we don't call infrastructure one of our core activities, the issues that the Minister spoke to around science and technology and innovation and competitiveness, that's what we would call our core activities. That funding has actually either remained stable or alternate, in some cases been made permanent, which is a significant advantage for us because we can actually plan with our partners much more effectively than we could in the past.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. Monsieur Bouchard.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Madam Minister, and good morning again to the Minister and Deputy Minister. My question is for the Minister. Mr. Minister, the Campex program was highly appreciated by the textile industry in Quebec. And the textile industry would like to have seen the program renewed. Are you able to tell us whether funds have been reinvested in other programs in Canada? And can you tell us whether the sums reinvested, whether there has been any allocation or any set aside for the textile industry? We can get a more specific and clear response later, but I can say a few words here. I met with the representatives of the industry in my office, and we had a very good discussion in order to establish the basis for a relationship in the future. In the absence of such a program, there are still other ways that we shared and can work on in order to guarantee the interests of this industry. When you say that you can answer later, could I perhaps have something in writing on that? Could you perhaps send me a note with the sums reinvested in ADEC Canada, and which are the sums allocated for the textile industry? And also now we come to another program, the tourism program. We know that this program was supposed to come and assist major manifestations in order to attract foreign tourists. So my question then is, what exactly are the criteria for granting funding or financial aid? And why would, say, a renowned festival, which has an international reputation, such as the Francophonie in Montreal, why weren't they funded, whereas your ministry has funded a private enterprise, a football team, and the Eskimos from Edmonton, who received funding in order to celebrate the Grey Cup? So I think there's something here which seems to be quite paradoxical, and I'd like to hear you about the criteria used and why is this famous festival not been funded, has seen its funding renewed. Perhaps the Deputy Minister can add something in this effect, but I can say right now that, of course, there has been a change in the program for this year, because it is important to have a situation where all urban municipalities can share in the program. Last year, more than 50% of the funding was for the major cities, Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. And here, this year, it is possible to provide funding to 29 other festivals in other urban centers throughout the whole country. I think it's very important to get diversity and to have also diversity in sharing the funds throughout the whole country. And other festivals in Quebec will also be able to be funded this year, whereas it was impossible to do so last year. Perhaps the Deputy Minister might be able to answer as well. It's important to set the global context of the government insofar as tourism. There is this program, but there are other programs as well. In regards to this program, it's important to remember that it's limited to 2 years. Last year and this year. As the Minister said, this year the government decided to target more locations and to invest with the Canada's Tourism Commission in order to support interventions over the next few years. It's important that this year was the last year of a 2-year program. Mr. Minister, how can you justify such a decision? Whereas your decision was known and widely announced regarding this international festival just 1 month before the event, whereas expenditures had already been made by this organization. So how can you justify this action? You say, yes, fine, last year it was allocated to major cities, but it was only known 1 month before the event was to be held, whereas commitments had already been undertaken by the organization. Insofar as timing is, I think that all organizations were aware that there was no guarantee given to any of them. All of these organizations knew quite well that until a final decision was made and announced, there was no commitment. Thank you, Mr. Discerny. Mr. Lake.
Mr. Chair, and I note John Iveson's in the room. I'm tempted to ask you questions about the British election results, because I'm sure that would be an interesting topic of conversation for both of you, but not part of your estimates, so I'll focus on on things that I think will be of interest as we approach whenever our next election campaign is. And I think there's probably a couple of defining issues as we move forward, notwithstanding the stuff that gets talked about in question period. I think criminal justice issues, which I won't get into here, and I think the issue of taxation will probably be big issues during whenever that next election campaign is. We've seen the two biggest parties in the House have very different approaches regarding the taxation issues, and one of the things that we see in the House on a fairly regular basis is no matter what it is that we're funding or what program we're doing, the Liberals, while the opposition parties in general, tend to ask for more. They want more programs being funded and more entities within those programs being funded on virtually every program that we have. And the spending, of course, has to be funded from somewhere, and I think what we've seen is that the Liberal leadership's been pretty clear in terms of I think we will have to raise taxes was one of the quotes in terms of having to go down that road, and I think it's going to be an important part as we move forward. Now, we've talked about things like GST hikes and more recently a specific proposal to raise corporate taxes, which is where I want to go with this question. We've set our corporate tax rate to go from 22% to 15%. I think right now we're at 18%, so we're more than halfway to that mark, and the Liberal Party's proposed a 20% increase in that 15% to 18%, 3 points. Maybe, if you could, maybe speak to two things: the role that our approach to taxation has played in terms of Canada's leadership economically during this time of global economic slowdown. It's quite well known that Canada is regarded by most of the experts to have performed very strongly and be in a very strong position right now. And then maybe speak to the potential that we have, or what you think might occur if we were to reverse that trend in corporate tax rates. What are the experts saying? What are Canadian businesses saying in terms of the impact of that?
Thank you, and I think you've put on the record a very important analysis of the situation and what separates the government position from the opposition position on taxation. There's no question that right now we have the lowest tax rate for new businesses in the G7. By 2012, we'll have the lowest tax rate for any businesses in the G7, and that is an important point for our competitiveness as we seek to make it easier for domestic businesses to grow and compete, and also to invest foreign capital when it is advantageous for Canada and Canadians. The other point that I would like to make based on your remarks is that, and should be known by Canadians, is that the current corporate tax reductions, business tax reductions, are already booked. So any changes to that, they've been passed in budgets. So any changes to that is actually a tax increase in terms of the expectations of our businesses and their forward planning. And so it is not correct when the Liberal opposition says that they are freezing taxes. That's actually not correct. They are actually increasing the taxes because the tax rate reduction was already booked in a budget. Having said that, there's no question that our current policies are being noted around the world. I noticed this, Minister Van Loan, as our Trade Minister notices this, that there is increased interest in investing in Canada as a safe place to invest with business-friendly policies that can allow a business to grow and add more jobs and add more opportunity. I see that when I go to innovation conferences and competitiveness conferences. I went to one in San Diego 3 weeks ago, and basically Canada stood almost alone, but certainly stood apart because of our policies that are going to be able to grow businesses and grow investment in the future. So that's an anecdote, perhaps, but anecdotes tell a story.
Right. Just want to talk a little bit about the digital economy strategy. Maybe you spoke to it a little bit in your opening statement earlier. Could you maybe outline the consultations, what they involve, and what you see them likely achieving, and then maybe comment on the benefit that you might anticipate for Canadian consumers as we move forward?
Yeah, well, let me just say just a couple things about the digital economy, because the digital economy is about more than e-commerce. E-commerce is certainly a part of it, and an important part of it, but it's the digital economy is also about how business adopts ICT into their business processes, either marketing or logistics, those kinds of issues. It's also about how society does things online. It might be citizen interaction with government. It might be gaining access to government services, as well as the private sector aspect of it and the social marketing and media aspect of it. So all of the studies that I've read indicate that the more that we do online as a society, generally, the more productive we will be. And that's why this is important for our economic future, and that's why our consultation is going to be so broad. All Canadians are invited to participate in the consultation online, by social media, or by more old-fashioned methods, and we certainly are going to take that into account with a short time frame, get the consultations done by July, and then start considering the results that we get from that.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Mr. Lake. We're going to have our last member ask both ministers questions about the main estimates before I grant you your leave. So we just have 5-6 minutes with Mr. Massey.
Chair, and to balance the discussion about corporate tax cuts, the reality right now is we're actually borrowing money from the public and paying interest on it for years to be able to do this. It's a policy as well, too, with the HST, where $6 billion is going to be borrowed and have to be paid until we get into surpluses and retire that debt. So it certainly is something that Canadians think about. And other businesses I know that believe that this is a wrong type of a policy, because if you're a manufacturer, for example, and you're not making any money right now, lowering a corporate tax cut doesn't really do any good. But I don't want every one of my comments or questions to be an outright attack on the minister here, so I perceive that way. So I do want to ask about research and development review, which is in the budget, and there's a lot of interest about that and kind of quietly out there. When will the terms of reference be available for this, and will the scope include the public and research councils with that? And is a date been selected when that will come out for the public?
Sure. Important question. I don't think we've selected a particular date, but let me put the context for you. The R&D review was put in the budget because I feel very strongly that we cannot just simply rest on our laurels. That I get a lot of positive feedback, by the way, from business on our R&D partnerships with them via the IRAP program or the shred tax credits. Those are two very obvious cases in point. But I don't think we should rest on our laurels. This is about making sure we have the best government business programs possible to expand our innovation and competitiveness. So those are the kinds of questions I'm asking. This is good. We know it's good because businesses tell us it's good. Is it the best? And that's the kind of dialogue I want to have with the private sector on this.
What about the research councils? Do we have your word that they will be consulted on this as well?
Yeah, I think that we want to get their input, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Now, we were talking earlier about the deferral accounts. I raised that, and it's been made aware to me that apparently the CRTC will receive Bell's final submission on Friday. Now, the deferral accounts are over $630 million. You're rolling out rural broadband announcements in remote areas. They have a mandate to use approximately a third of that as well. Isn't it a little bit odd that there's no connection between your department and the CRTC on how to roll out a strategy?
Well, no, I wouldn't say that. We did. One of the reasons why I know we've been criticized for the broadband being rather late vis-a-vis its first announcement. But the reason for that is because we took into account the business plans of the incumbent providers. And those business plans kept changing. As they kept expanding their high-speed networks, we had to change what we defined as unserviced or underserviced areas. And so what we decided to do, what I decided to do, was to go to the farthest points first and then work our way down. So that means Nunavut, Northwest Territories, rural Quebec, Northern Ontario, and work our way down rather than try to pick off some areas that are likely to be areas of investment by these companies in the near future.
Are you in discussions, though, with the CRTC? Because they'll be making the final decision about the use of those funds. Are you in discussions with the CRTC about that, though?
Richard?
2 points. One, the CRTC decision has been in the making for quite a few years.
Yes.
Yes. So we thought it'd be useful to just go ahead and make the announcements that the minister made on Sunday, because even once they finalize how that $600 million will be used, it will take some amount of time to work through. They are faced with the same landscape considerations as we were, and yes, there will be some discussions with the CRTC.
Okay. One of the items in the budget that was pushed by this committee ages ago was a manufacturing report that we commissioned with the capital cost reduction allowance, and having that extended over a series of years. The budget still has it till 2011. Why is there no consideration to either extending that for a longer period of time? What I hear from a lot of industry is that they need several years to plan out some of the larger equipment purchases, and they're looking for stability there before they make the investment.
I think that any budget is a series of decisions and a series of priorities, and our priority is having the lowest business tax rates for small, medium-sized, and large businesses that we get in the G7, and that's the priority that we chose.
Okay, and finally, with regards to the, I don't want to get into a debate about the HST. We all know our positions on this, but the real issue that we're going to be facing with the tourism industry in Ontario is a lower amount of visitations by Americans because of WHTI, high dollar, and there was evidence presented at this committee from British Columbia affected by the HST in tourism. 2 reports were submitted to this committee on that. Does your government have any plans on being more assertive in the tourism sector to try to increase American visitation? There's been a lot of attention paid to international visitation, but our American visitation is crippling communities in Ontario, everywhere from Fort Erie, Niagara Falls region to my area, and we've seen a reduction. Is there anything that your government is planning to do? The U.S. had programs to increase passports and so forth. Has your department thought about being more assertive into American markets to help the acquisition and expand the visitation of tourism?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, there's a number of different markets out there. We see a great potential of new markets in China, Russia, Brazil, India. Those are huge potential growth markets for tourism for this country. So I wouldn't just particularize it to the United States of America per se. Having said that, Minister of State Rob Moore, who does obviously do a lot of work for small business and for tourism, is working on a new tourism strategy, and his work, I'm sure, will be discussed when he's ready to discuss it.
Thank you very much, Minister Clement. Thank you, Mr. Massey. I want to thank Minister Clement and Minister Yellick for appearing in front of our committee. You may take your leave if you so wish.
Thank you very much.
And we'll spend the remaining 45 minutes with officials further discussing the main estimates. And we'll continue with Mr. McTague.
Thank you. Chair, I have a very simple question. I'm going to share this with Mr. Jalawal, who has some follow-up questions, as you can understand. Mr. Discerny, Mr. Booth, perhaps I could address this to you. There has been over the year. Sorry, I'll wait till there. That's okay.
We'll give them a minute to get reseated.
Actually, in the meantime, maybe we'll allow Mr. Jalawal to ask a question, I believe, of Mr. Watson.
Sure. Go ahead, Mr. Jalawal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Deputy Minister, Mr. Watson. As Minister, contrary to what the Minister was talking here, I'm an engineer. I work with numbers. And when I read these numbers from the core size of the budget, excluding the stimulus package that is temporary for 2 years, in the year 2006, it was 339 million, then 247, 242, 297, 183, 173, and in year 2012 it is 160 million. Could you specifically speak to this reducing core operating budget compared to what it was under the Liberal government? Why is it decreasing every year?
Sure, absolutely. The main reason, and we can get you some detailed answers later on this, but the main reason is at one point in time, the infrastructure budget for Infrastructure Canada was actually found in several votes all across government. So COA, Développement Économique Canada in Quebec, and Western Economic Diversification, for example, all had pieces of that vote. So if you want to know what the Government of Canada was spending on infrastructure, you had to go all over the place and add them all up. And it was felt that for transparency reasons, essentially, it made more sense to show that as one vote, as one activity. And so a big chunk of what we used to have in our budget was infrastructure spending. The peak year was actually $80 million showed up in our vote. This year, it's $5 million, which is a legacy. More money is actually being spent now in infrastructure than in some previous years, but you won't find it in our vote. You'll find it in Infrastructure Canada's vote, so you can see the entirety of what the Government of Canada is doing in one place. That's the biggest single difference of what's gone on here. It's a way of basically showing the accountability of who's actually spending what money, and in this case, it's a bunch of money being spent by Infrastructure Canada rather than by WD.
And so when you say WD is not spending as much money, Minister talked about the short-term plans when it comes to economic action plan, which is very temporary. But she have not talked about her vision and plans for this core operating budget when it comes to long-term Western economic diversification, bringing in opportunities into West. Could you say something about that, please?
Absolutely. I think if you go to the Minister's remarks, a couple of things that I think are critically important. Western diversification, born 1987. You look at the markets where Western Canadian businesses were at that point in time, and a whole bunch of our major competitors today weren't even in existence then as major players. If you look at the industries that Western Canada is in many cases today, those industries didn't even exist in 1987. I think of most of the digital imaging business and stuff like that. The question is, as Western Canadian natural resource producers compete against players that have lower labor costs, that maybe have different regulatory regimes that people might think are either fair or unfair, depending what your perspective is, but that Canadians need to compete against successfully in the world to maintain the standard of living we want, that's something Western diversification needs to be involved in. As we look in places like Vancouver, for example, where the digital imaging stuff, as was shown off quite successfully at the last Winter Olympic Games, if Canada is going to continue to be a player in that field and is going to be dominant in that field, we need different sets of skills, different sets of business capabilities, different sets of investments than we've had in the past. And so Western diversification, as the Minister noted in her remarks, needs to play a critical role in making sure that that happens. We have world-class research and development, as Minister Clement and the Deputy Minister for Industry Canada have noted in their remarks. And the question is, how can we play a role in turning those ideas into world-class profits for Canadians?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Delawal. Glad to see you there, Richard, and Mr. Booth. Very simply, I note there's some increase in the budget appropriated to the Competition Bureau and enforcement, some of those in regards to the changes in, as a result of C-10 last year. In your estimation, is that adequate? And what will be the impact at limiting the need for further public exposure to increases with the introduction of successful administrative monetary penalties, AMPs?
Short answer is, in discussion with the Commissioner, we believe that the resources that have been allocated are adequate to the challenge.
This hasn't obviously come to the attention of the committee at this time. Previous holders of the position of director, or as they now call it, commissioner of the Competition Bureau, have indicated a shortcoming of resources for effective enforcement. Do you see a request made to this parliamentary committee at some point down the road necessitating greater financial resources? Again, I haven't got an answer necessarily on the question of AMPs. Obviously, this goes back to general revenues. Is there a chance of recovering those specific to the department?
I would note that the budget of the Competition Bureau over the last 2 or 3 years was not insignificantly increased. We can give you $10 million that may not jump out at you in terms of the estimates, but there was an increase, I think, 2 or 3 years ago to indeed address the issues that you're addressing.
There's been a greater reliance, and perhaps even, I don't want to anticipate the outcome of a private member's bill that may put greater pressure on casting a much wider net on study or investigation. Should something like this happen, obviously contingencies will have to be made should Parliament pass this.
We would not like to speculate on parliamentary outcomes.
But things can and do change very rapidly. I know $200 a barrel crude might suddenly create a new appetite and make them a lot busier. Let me go to another smaller area in the few seconds that I have, and that's the budget allocated to Measurements Canada. Considering the new legislation that is proposed, not yet before this committee, obviously you'll have an opportunity to come back. Will it too find itself in a position of being found in a bit of a shortcoming relative to its new and renewed mandate?
Again, as you noted, the Minister announced, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, new proposals for Measurement Canada. One of the elements is indeed to have third parties become more involved. As the proposal works its way through Parliament and so forth, if there's a need for additional resources, I'm sure there'll be an opportunity to discuss that.
Thank you, Deputy Minister Discerny. Mr. Wallace.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here. So one of my favorite topics, the estimates. And so I had submitted a few questions in advance, and I'm going to try to stick to them, maybe come off them a little bit, but maybe you can just answer for me. This year's estimates book was excellent. It shows that how much a difference, 22% difference that the A, Bs, and Cs, the SUPs made in terms of costs. So actually we spent $309 billion last year, really. Mostly, I'm assuming due to stimulus. Would you concur that that your budget is up just for your department is at $2.4 billion in this when you're normally around $1 billion? Is it mainly because of stimulus? You would agree to that? Okay.
Yes. Almost 95%, I think.
So
stimulus of the increase is stimulus.
Last year's SUPs that were submitted. Now I know you're not all of that 22%, but your proportion of that. Does that get built into the mains this year? Last year's SUPs, or do you zero out and go from?
The answer is it depends. Some of the supplementary estimates, we have to ask for them every year. For example, access to repayable contributions for previous years. But if an initiative was continuing into this year, like for example, the small business internship program was approved in supplementary estimates last year, it is reflected in the main estimates here.
Okay, so your base budget would increase if the SUPs project is a base budget item that will last more than that particular current year. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, this is the first year I've seen the in the front of the book the addition of the SUPs in a nice chart. It really was more difficult for me to find. Speaking of structure, which is not one of the questions, but within this industry budget, I find FedDev for Southern Ontario. But I have to go elsewhere in the book to find Western Diversification, Atlantic Canada, the Quebec Fund. Why is FedDev included in here and not on its own, or are we looking at moving those things back, or why is that set up differently? Why did I have to go search for that?
This year was a bit of a transition year. The Department of Industry had been given the mandate to help start, launch, establish FedDev, because we were carrying out certain activities such as the infrastructure Canada activities. The government asked us to put it together and launch it and create the infrastructure because there was no staff, there was nobody there. So that was one of the reasons why it was captured within our...
that is a separate item next year, or do we know?
Well, it's separate within the portfolio, the industry portfolio.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, I know it's separate within here, but Western diversification has its own part of the book. It's not in the industry section. Can I expect FedDev to be separate? It's got an own minister, or are we going to continue to keep it within the industry portfolio?
My understanding is it remains under the industry portfolio under Minister.
Okay, I appreciate that. Based on the budget, C9, I'm not a big fan of being able to come back, be frank, with departments being able to come back 3 times in a year. I've said that for 4 years in a row now, and it'll continue to be that way. What are we, based on C9, are we expecting big subs from in AB and I hope not in C from the industry department?
Well, first of all, in the Budget Implementation Act, 2 of the programs, Genome and Canada Youth Business Foundation, were directly in the Business Implementation Act, so will not be coming back in supplementary estimates. What we will see in supplementary estimates A are the 2 initiatives that have already been approved by Treasury Board Minister, and those are both for the National Research Council, for clusters, the cluster initiatives, and for Triumph, so a total of $113 million for those 2. So that will be supplementary estimates A. There are 9 other initiatives that we're currently in the process of finalizing the program details, and we'll put those for consideration to Treasury Board ministers, and once they are approved, then they will go into supplementary estimates B, more likely.
Question in this round, if you don't mind. I'm going to go to Stats Canada, for example. They're getting a fairly significant increase. I mean, as a percentage, 20%. And then in 2011, they go up again. And then they drop significantly in 2012. And they're sort of their number. Where I always try to find things that are a little bit odd to me is where the FTEs don't match up or change considerably compared to the can you explain to me what's happening at StatsCan? And are we going to be prepared? Because I think we need to make cost cutting, and I have no apologies for it, in areas where we can. Can you tell me what's happening at StatsCan?
Census.
It's a census upgrade, so those are temporary employees?
It relates to the 2011 census. There's a ramp up, then a ramp down.
A ramp down. Okay, I appreciate that. That's good. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moss. Thank you, Mr. Discerny. Maintenant, Monsieur.
And now we go to Mr. Carlet. Thank you very much. I have 2 subjects which I hold dearly. Research on climate. For example, we all know that it's important to connect everybody with wideband. And there seems to be a lack of funds for remote areas. I think that might contribute to the exodus of young people and might even be a barrier to young people to set up business as independent workers in the area, because, you know, many people can work at home with instruments which are sophisticated and highly productive. So I'd like to know, how do you assess the financial needs, or rather, at what rate did you assess them regarding the need for investment in order to connect everyone? We as officials are here to explain, describe, and comment the estimates that the government presented to you, so it's very difficult for us to speculate as to the overall envelope. And secondly, it depends also what you mean by connectivity, because, of course, this is related to the type of service that people can get. Well, high-speed service, because if they have to push pedals, that's rather slow. Yes, well, what I'm trying to say is when we're talking about how much it's going to cost, it depends very much in part on the quality in order to reach this goal. The minister said a few moments ago that the 200-some million that we were going to spend on it was to achieve significant progress in order to reach out to many, many Canadians. We didn't make any definitive calculations as to how much the whole thing is going to cost to connect the very last Canadian who's at the very end of a remote road. We haven't calculated how much this will cost, but the investments that we will be making are going to be contributing significantly to fill the void between those who have access right now and those who don't. I would imagine that you must also be a resource to the minister in the good sense of the word, since you advise him. So certainly there are evaluations made, because we know that the minister has said, and there was a demonstration of great interest. There were 570 requests for roughly $1 billion. So I would imagine then that it is an important proportion then that could be covered with these investments of $1 billion. But today with 225 million, well, I don't know what the time is. It's set at 3 years. I don't know whether you're encouraging the minister to proceed more quickly, but there seems to be a great need. We hear constantly being told that the economy depends also on the development of the digital economy, so the need is pressing. And I think I heard the minister also refer to private investment in this venture, and the hopes of the department is that the proportion of the private sector would be roughly estimated at how much? Well, before I do, I'd like to refer to the billion that the minister mentioned. Many of these requests cover the same territory because we made an appeal to the private sector, and a number of companies submitted proposals. Many of them overlap the same territory, so this isn't necessarily an addition or an aggregate of the total need in the country. Would it be possible, Mr. Chair, then to ask the department to hold an information session on the real and actual situation on which the department and the minister base themselves in order to identify the needs? Would it be possible to have an information session? We can discuss this, yes? Because I really would like to come to the next question, which I also found important. On our website, I just want to say, on our website, we've established the geographical maps on which we asked people from the private sector to make their submissions. So the approach that we made use of in order to define the rest that had to be served is already public. And as Mr. Massey said, there's also the contribution of the CRTC once they've made a decision. Yes, but it's more difficult through little dots in color to identify reality. But please consult our website, because we do have our geographic maps that set things out quite clearly. Thank you very much. And now, Mr. Wallace.
Chair, I'm glad to have a few more minutes. The numbers we see here, are they net of any revenues? Are they net numbers or are they gross numbers? They're net numbers. Does the Ministry of Industry have any revenue sources, other than taxes, of course? But can you give me a list or the kind of things that the industry charges in terms of user fees or anything that you have that you gain funds from?
Yep, we have lots.
Can you give me some examples? I think Joanna has.
Yes,
examples.
yes. Well, there are numbers. There are the ones that are not respendable, so things like like fines for infraction under the Competition Act or spectrum licensing. Those go straight to the Consolidated Revenue Fund.
Okay.
So they would not be in the main estimates, but you would see the details in the report on plans and priorities. You
So
would see how much.
are there some that you are able to collect and stay with the industry?
Yes. So those would be for when we're allowed to recover our fees, our operating costs. So, for example, the cost of processing, a company wanting to incorporate themselves, they pay a fee, and we retain that to pay for the staff and the necessary equipment we need to do that.
What kind of number is that? How big a number is that you collect annually?
Well, if you look at we've got 4 organizations, we're in the range of 68 million or so. But then if you add CIPO to that, we're talking another 140, 150 million or so.
And is that do you get pushback from the clients on those on those fees, or?
Well, okay.
No, they love our service. but the biggest one is CIPO, the Patents Office.
Okay.
And CIPO has a revolving fund, so that fees are paid to with the submission of patents and copyright, and those fees are used to offset the costs of administering that. I mean, there are rules around the fact that this can't be a profit center for Industry Canada. I mean, we have to line up over time, not at every instant in time, but we have to line up over time, our reasonable costs with the fees that we charge.
Is that
I think it's safe to say that we don't get a lot of criticism from our clients on the question of fees.
Okay. Another question I have for you that I'm a firm believer that we had to do the stimulus funding, but I'm also a very firm believer that we have to get back to a more balanced approach than we've had, and I prefer to do it internally than what has happened in the past, where some of our partners, we've taken money away from them and not transferred money and so forth. But so for an organization such as Industry Canada that's had a significant increase, 2.5% increase, or 2.5 times increase, not 2.5. And getting back there's a number of issues that I have in terms of hoping that happens. But one of the programs that I hear over and over again positive things about, and I think the Minister mentioned it too, is IRAP. What is the future, in your view, from staff perspective, of the IRAP program? And do you think it will play a more significant role, or maintain its money, or where do you hope to see that go?
Well, 2 points. One, the IRAP program, the amounts that it received during the Economic Action Plan was a top-up to an existing base.
Right.
Secondly, there was reference, I believe, by Mr. Massé to the R&D review. This is one program in that context that would be looked at in terms of effectiveness, in terms of would it deserve more money. Thirdly, I would say that within the initial launch of FedDev, there was some additional IRAP money targeted to Southern Ontario.
Right.
So there was, in some ways, a double supplement that occurred for this program.
Just a clarification on what you said earlier. In C9, we have some more money for Genome Canada. In the budget, it looks like there's a decrease. Was there a decrease? I can't remember. And from to 48 million or something. And so this budget doesn't reflect what's in C9, of course,
no,
because it was done long in the fall,
issue.
right?
This was printed beforehand.
So that number is not really accurate based on C9, if C9 actually passes and becomes law. Then is that correct?
That's correct.
So that we will see. Will we see that in subs A then, that has to be done?
No, because in the case of Genome, it will be charged directly from the Budget Implementation Act. So where you will see it is in public accounts as payments are made. There will not be a need for a new appropriation to be voted. When C9 is approved, the authorities will be granted to make the payments to Genome.
one quick final question.
Quickly.
These are estimates.
Yes.
They're not actuals.
No.
Where would somebody like myself find the actuals that are spent in a year?
The actuals, you'll find them in two places, either the Public Accounts of Canada or, for even more details, the departmental report on plans and priorities.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace. Mr. Massey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you as well for staying here. With regards to the Federal Economic Development Agency for Southern Ontario, what's going to be the focus? Is it going to be manufacturing, food processing, and agriculture, new renewable energy? What's the plan for that agency over the next few years?
In keeping with appropriate allegation of accountability responsibilities, I think you should ask Minister Goodyear and Deputy Minister there, Archibald. They have been making a number of decisions / announcements, and I think they would be best positioned to respond specifically to the going forward strategies that they have. I could speak to when we had a little bit carriage of it in terms of getting it launched, where we invested some monies, but in terms of going forward, you should ask them.
So it's being politically crafted then. The department doesn't have a plan or a business model that was evolved and then handed down to the political decision making. You're telling me right now it's basically all you did was launch it.
Well, just just launching it, I think belittles the effort that went into.
Well, you just told me to go see Mr. Goodyear, and you're the deputy minister, and I kind of. If we ask you about StatsCan, if we ask you about all kinds of other departments, you're usually able to provide a response. You just told me to go see somebody else.
So, Minister Goodyear has his own deputy minister, in the same way that Mr. Watson is deputy minister for the Minister of WD. Minister Goodyear has his own deputy minister, Bruce Archibald. Secondly, in terms of what I can speak to with some measure of authority and knowledge, is when we did the handoff to Minister Goodyear and to Dr. Archibald, who were announced, I think, last August 13th, I could speak to the investments that were made at that point. Subsequent to that, because you were asking about what are their strategies, are they going to be in R&D, are they going to be in manufacturing, what have you, I thought it would be most helpful if they were able, in the same way as...
I just don't have them here. That's so I mean, Minister Clement approves the final decisions. Is that not true?
In this particular case, Minister Goodyear does have authorities to make decisions over which initiatives get federal support.
So Minister Clement will not make the final decision on those programs and spending then?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. That's fair then. And we'll follow that up. The Marquee Tourism Program has attracted a lot of attention because a lot of festivals need several years to sustain themselves, evolve their market, and there's been a really a difficult period of time to get sponsorships, advertising, other revenues that traditionally had been available out there, even attendance at some of these festivals. Did your department recommend the Marquee tourism programs that would be finalized? Did you present that to the minister for final? Is there an evaluation? Because there's a lot of questions over, say, for example, Toronto Pride, Vancouver Pride, and then even here in Ottawa, jazz versus blues. Does your department have a full recommendation and then pass that on to the minister?
The criteria that were used to assess programs or projects or submissions are public. They're on our website. The AG is currently doing a review of year one of funding in terms of how we went about it. The department reviewed all applications that were submitted against program criteria to make sure that what was being proposed was eligible for funding in terms of certain activities. And then in concert with the minister's office, final decisions were made about projects.
Were any of your recommendations overturned?
This would be bordering on that very delicate zone of ministerial, departmental interface.
Well, no, I don't think it is. Let me give you a quick example. In student summer programs, we as members of parliament are presented a list, and we either approve or disapprove of that list, and we can make adjustments on that, even if you're in opposition. It makes no difference. The same thing happens in this situation is when you submit a list to the minister. I want to know is whether or not that list was changed from the original submissions from the department.
As I said, we reviewed all applications that were submitted and provided an assessment as to how closely they conform to program criteria, and then had subsequent discussions with the minister's office. At the end of the day, obviously, all decisions that are made are those that are made by the minister.
But you make recommendations, do you not?
We assessed all projects against criteria.
Recommendations. I mean, that's almost absurd. When I've dealt with youth programs and worked on them for years, and they've always had recommendations from the departments that go forward in terms of the analysis.
A couple of things which I think are worthy. This program is an element within the Economic Action Plan. If I give you another example of the other major program within the EAP that the department was responsible for, which is Knowledge Infrastructure Program. We used exactly the same approach. We reviewed all applications from universities, community colleges, assessed them against programs.
I'm asking a simple question, whether the department makes recommendations to the minister.
The Deputy Minister has responded. You may not be happy with the response, but he has answered your question. Well, I'm going to go to Mr. Braid next, but the Deputy Minister has responded.
That's not. I don't. That's not a. It's a simple, straightforward question: whether they make recommendations about a program or not. And there's.
Well, I think, Mr. Massey, if you review the transcript, you'll see, in fact, that the Deputy Minister did answer that question, and ask that you take a look at it later. And if we want to pursue that further at some future date, we can. But right now, we're going to go to Mr. Braid.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our officials for being here this morning. Yes, sir.
After what you've just said, since your colleagues at Public Accounts would like me to visit with them now.
I'm still here.
I'm still here. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Discerny. I have just a couple of questions with respect to estimates for FedDev, and I'm not sure if they're answers or questions that can be addressed this morning without Minister Goodyear or Mr. Archibald here, but let's give it a try. First of all, I note in the estimates for FedDev that the Southern Ontario Development Program, SODP, has estimated spending of $176 million in 2010 and 2011. Could you speak to what that spending will be on, types of programs or initiatives?
Unfortunately, what we really need to do to give you a good answer to that is the RPP of FedDev Ontario, which we don't right now. So, and the other thing to say, of course, is that Minister Goodyear and Bruce Archibald are the real experts. Mm-hmm. So they'll be the ones that could give you the best answers.
Is the SODP a 5-year program?
I'm not. I believe so, but I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm. Let me try one last one. Again, I note that planned spending under or at FedDev for 2010-2011 is $395 million, and then it levels off the following 2 years to around just over $200 million. Could you speak to why the planned spending is higher for the next fiscal year?
I'm sorry, we don't have that information either. Yeah.
Could I just tell you, though, though, that with respect to your previous question, SODP, I'm advised it is a 5-year program.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. May I share time?
Yes, go ahead. Mr. Van Kesteren, go ahead.
Mr. Van Kesteren, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Booth, I don't know if you can answer this question for me. I don't have any questions on the estimates, but the government has made a conscious effort to, rather than spread its resources right across the field, they've concentrated in certain areas, and there was a report done, and of course that report made that recommendation. My question is, I'm sure you have a system of monitoring the success of this program. Can you comment on that and maybe just tell the committee how that's been working? And I know we zeroed in on the high techs and the areas that we feel Canada is going to be able to excel in future years. Can you maybe just comment on that?
Sorry, when you're talking about this program, do you mean our R&D related spending? Yes. Yeah. Well, I think this is obviously a very important question for us. And there are a couple of facts that are staring us in the face here. One is we are a leader in the OECD on public support for R&D, and we're pretty successful in terms of our results, especially in terms of basic science. But where we're not very successful is in business support for R&D. In fact, we're at best in the middle of the pack. So this is, I believe, one of the reasons the government has decided to undertake this R&D review, because we do spend a lot of money in this area in two parts, right? One bucket is on the tax support side, the SR&ED tax credit, and then the other part is direct support, some of which is for basic science, but some of which is directly aimed at R&D. Now, we have some areas that we hear from stakeholders work really well. Like, for example, IRAP is one that stakeholders feel is very successful. And we have increased our support in other areas, but this is something that the government wants to look at through the R&D review.
Thank you, Mr. Booth. Mr. Garneau.
Thank you very much. I have a question for Mr. Watson in answer to Mr. Dhaliwal's question about why the WED's budget was ramping down. It seems to me, if I understood correctly, and this applies to other regional development agencies as well, it seems to me that you said a decision was taken to remove infrastructure, that component from it. So if it's going down, I just want you to tell me whether that means that this infrastructure component which was removed from it is actually increasing, because that's the only way I can make it work out.
Yes. If you looked at the estimates, I don't have them right in front of me now, but if you, while it was in WD's component, it was not in Infrastructure Canada's vote. You only, of course, vote on it once. So what got taken out of our vote got put into the Infrastructure Canada vote. There is another piece that's worth mentioning here, and it's another piece in 2005, 2006, and 2007. There were monies set aside to celebrate the centennial of Alberta and Saskatchewan joining Confederation. And as much as those of us from Saskatchewan and Alberta would like to celebrate that every year, the parliamentary vote of the day was that it was a fixed amount of money for a fixed period of time. And so, of course, when those the payment for those celebrations ended and those programs ended, obviously it stopped being in our vote. So between infrastructure and the Centennials program, that would be the vast bulk of what's actually disappeared from.
So if I look into the estimates for infrastructure, I will see that they are actually increasing for your western region.
Well, you'll see that entire vote. I don't know that they identify it by region particularly. It's one big number for that department. So I don't have it in front of me, but that's the principle, and I'm quite certain that's the way it shows up.
Okay. And I have a quick question for Mr. Booth on SADI. SADI has been around for a while, and there have been 3, if I'm not mistaken, announcements with respect to it for a total of about $50 million. There's still about, well, over $300 million for that program that has not been allocated. I just want to know, can we be assured that that money will be reserved and continue to be reserved for the SADI program?
Well, I guess what I would say is it's certainly our working assumption that that's the way it'll work. This, of course, depends on the decisions of Parliament in the future. But I would also say, without saying any names, that we are in active discussions with a number of companies right now related to the SADI program. So, you know, the program is alive and well, and we're working through the discussions with companies to make further use of the program.
Yes, I make the assumption that the money will stay there because, after all, it was announced specifically for SADI by the government with a great deal of fanfare. I have one last question. Est-ce que le gouvernement du Canada va continuer?
Will the government of Canada continue to subsidize the asbestos industry? Will the federal government continue to fund, let's say, the industry is at the position of this government? I didn't understand which industry. Asbestos.
Finance the asbestos industry through funding of the Chrysotil Institute.
I'll have to confess I don't know anything about that funding now, and I will, if it is in fact Industry Canada funding, I will find out and get back to you in a timely way.
Your point is valid. It may be another department, but I am curious about the question. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Garneau, before we suspend briefly to allow our witnesses to depart, we'll just have a brief question from Monsieur Bouchard. Brèvement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to ask my 2 questions, but I would be grateful if you could answer them in writing, even though it's later on. I would like to know, what is the time allotted before a business will find out when they ask for a grant, whether it be any of the agencies? We know that there are 4 agencies for all of Canada. So what then is the time frame from the moment a request is made and the minister signs? That's the first question. And secondly, regarding the economic agencies then. So my second question then is, I'd like to know the delegation of authority. The delegation of authority regarding the operational structure of each of these agencies, COA, for example, the agency for Quebec, and WD. Is there a decision-making power delegated to lower levels, or is it concentrated just at the level of the minister? I really like to get a very clear idea, but for each of the agencies. So please answer me in writing. I have no problems with that. Thank you very much, Mr. Bouchard. Mr. Booth or Mr. Watson? I would say very quickly that insofar as the Western diversification, the delay is 0 time. Mr. Booth?
Aware that there is, and I will research the question and give a written answer. I'm not aware that there are criteria laid out for exact timing, but I will research that.
Okay.
As far as the delegation of authority, I would just say that in general, the form of a department is under the authority of the deputy minister. Although the aims of the department, the budget of the department, of course, belong to the minister and ultimately to Parliament.
Thank you very much Thank you very much, Mr. Booth. Thank you to our witnesses. We'll suspend just for 2 minutes to allow the witnesses to depart, and then we'll return and vote on the votes. This meeting suspended. We're coming out of suspension. Now we have about 30 votes to vote on, and we're going to go through each one of them. The amount of money we are approving is in excess of $7 billion. It's for under three different headings. And the committee has three choices with respect to each vote. The committee can adopt the vote, the committee can negative the vote, or the committee can reduce the vote. So we'll begin in the order in which we've been given them, beginning with the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency. Vote 1 under ACOA is for the amount of $85 million. Shall vote 1 carry? Vote 1 is carried. Vote 5 under ACOA is for the amount of $289 million. Shall vote 5 carry?
None of us have a document.
I'm going on the orders of the question's been asked. Which order am I following? I'm following the orders of the day. On the orders of the day, the votes are listed.
Vote 5.
And the amounts I've taken from the estimates, the big blue book. So on the orders of the day, the votes are listed in order.
Can we take the votes that are assigned to the different agencies?
Just 1 minute, Mr. Wallace. Let's just attend to Mr. Garneau's question. So on the orders of the day under Section 2, the votes are listed, and I'm following that order.
Do them in chunks under the agencies that they're listed under. So instead of doing vote 1, 5, 6, all the votes under the regions of Quebec.
Well, we're currently under vote 5 for ACOA, so I'll call that vote. Shall vote 5 under ACOA carry? Okay. Vote 10 under ACOA is for the amount of $83 million. Shall vote 10 carry? Vote 1 under the Economic Development Agency for the Regions of Quebec is for $47 million. Shall vote 1 carry? Vote 1 is carried. Vote 5 under the Economic Development Agency for the Regions of Quebec is for $376 million. Shall vote 5 carry? Vote 5 has carried. We now go to the votes for Industry Canada.
Mr. Chair,
would you like to adopt all the votes for Industry Canada
on division, if they want? I don't care. Yes.
Okay, so it's votes 1 through 105 inclusive. Is it the wish of the committee to adopt them all at once? So all those votes carry. All those votes have carried. The final set of votes under Western Economic Diversification are two. Vote 1 is for the amount of $55 million. For WED, shall vote 1 carry? Vote 1 is carried. And vote 5 under WED is for the amount of $368 million. Shall vote 5 carry? Vote.
Order. I don't know if you're hearing it here. My colleagues and I are saying on division, but I.
Yes, we are hearing that.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes, the clerk is recording that.
Just to clarify previous vote, Mr. Chair, the votes listed, not inclusive, between 5 and 105, is what I believe I heard. We've already voted on this, but just to clarify that it was not inclusive between 5 and 105, but the ones listed here. Yes.
Under Industry Canada, we voted en masse for votes 1 through 105 inclusive.
Inclusive. Okay.
That's right.
Very good.
Okay. And vote 5 is carried under WED. Those are all the votes. Shall the chair report the main estimates back to the House? Okay. The chair shall report the main estimates back to the House. Thank you very much for your cooperation on this file. Now, we're going to move in camera, so if I could ask the clerk to have us put in camera while we discuss the draft report for the telecom study.